All right, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. I'm your co-host, Omari Salisbury, and right now I'm very excited. One, because we're in the CD. Two, because I'm joined by a fellow Garfield Bulldog. You see, no matter how many of these levels of funny letters are after your name, you know what I'm saying? It all comes back to the doghouse, Garfield first.
So much talent comes from that place. I mean, you can't help it.
Yeah, the talent's right here. This is Dr. P. I was about to call you your brother, Dr. Daudi Abe, joining us today. I'm kind of throwing it out there, the hip hop professor, but you do so much more than that. Brought you out here today to talk about two things. We know that you have a book that's coming out in November, Emerald Street, and talking about really the history of hip hop here in Seattle. And you've also got some education initiatives that are underway. You are a professor at Seattle College.
Seattle Central.
Yep. up on Broadway. Let's get right into it though, because a lot of people, especially now, there's not legacy radio here. Well, there is legacy radio on the AM dial, but when you think of radio here, big radio, iHeartRadio, Cube 93, things like that, there's been a disconnect in big radio all the way back when it was Ackerley and then Clear Channel and things like that with the community. So a lot of people don't tend to think that Seattle has a long and pretty illustrious hip hop history, and we've actually made some contributions to hip hop culture. Yep. So I'll give a few minutes. Let me throw it over to you here, and I know this is what you do professionally in the classroom. Maybe you can kind of set the stage of the genesis around hip hop here in Seattle.
Well, Seattle has a long history of the black community in general, and that existence here kind of helped set the stage for what hip hop would look like once it eventually arrived here. And so we're looking back to the fall of 1979 with the release and arrival of Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. And that first gets here on radio station KYAC, which was 1250 on the dial, which precedes KFOX. And the program director at the time, Robert L. Scott, father of our own Jasmine Scott, was the first one to put Rapper's Delight on the radio when nobody else around town was really trying to do that. So that's 1979. So then you get it to 1980, and that station undergoes an ownership change, and the call letters are switched. And call letters go from KYAC to KKFX, which became informally known as KFOX.
Yep.
And so I think for some people it's a little bit difficult to think about an AM music station because FM, generally speaking, seems to come in a little bit more fully, and if you're talking about songs that have a lot of bass, you know what I'm saying, it picks up a little bit better on FM. But this was AM radio, and at that time, AM radio, if that had the song that you wanted to hear, it didn't matter if it was AM or FM, simply that it was there. So it goes over and becomes KFOX, and a young man who began as an intern at KYAC then gets a job hosting a Sunday evening show. And this young man's name is Ness Rodriguez, who would go by the name Nasty Ness. And so Nasty Ness kicks off Fresh Tracks in 1981, which becomes the first all-rap radio show on the West Coast, west of the Mississippi. And for young kids like us to hear cutting and scratching and mixing on the radio was revolutionary, was something that had never been heard on the radio before. And Ness kind of took directly that influence of people who were doing it in New York, like Jelly Bean Benitez, and the first rap radio show from New York City. I'm blanking on the man's name right now, but you know who I'm talking about. But so anyway, Ness is taking his cue from them and not only playing songs and cuts, but ending the Fresh Tracks show with a 30-minute master mix, which is just a complete combination of mixtape, essentially, 30-minute mixtape that he just throws together and mixes people like Hall & Oates and Egyptian Lover, and he's really pulling from an eclectic kind of selection of music as he makes the ingredients of his master mix. And so that aspect of radio certainly had a massive amount of effect on how everything would develop in the following. Once Ness goes in 1984 and has this seminal meeting with somebody who's become known for throwing these parties at the Boys and Girls Club up there on 19th and Yesler. That man would be Anthony Ray. And once Sir Mix-a-Lot and Ness meet, Ness brings him down to K-Fox to start airing his material. And very quickly, Mix-a-Lot becomes the most requested artist on K-Fox.
Really? I'm tripping just off the fact that you're talking about 1981. And even before then, and Seattle having the first all hip-hop rap show west of the Mississippi. So even before LA, even before San Francisco, everything else.
People would play songs here and there, but a dedicated show, that was Fresh Tracks.
Right. And so a lot of people know Mix, of course, the whole world, but really became a global superstar right here from Seattle. And real organic roots. You talk right there on 19th and Yesler. We're here on Union right now. Right, and what's some of the history here on Union? You know, one of the people who watches this show every day is Fred Burwell, is BZ Two Slaps. What's some of the hip hop history here on Union?
You know, so probably one of the more well-known ones. By the way, you would be surprised how many people do not know that Posse on Broadway is about Seattle. You'd be surprised. I mean,
really?
You'd be surprised how many people kind of fail to really
coming
listen.
Coming from Seattle, I would think it. Yeah, but you're right.
It's like I said, you would be surprised. But so just kind of referencing that, you have one of the. So if I can just detour on the meaning of Posse on Broadway in terms of like it was Seattle's version, it may be some equivalency of South Bronx by Boogie Down Productions. And by that, I mean it was kind of like an identity song. So even if you had never been to South Bronx, you were hearing KRS-One talk about it, it gave you a sense of what it was. Even if you'd never been to Seattle, you could listen to Posse on Broadway and get a sense of what it was. And that song actually really taught me a valuable lesson about the power of hip hop to export culture. So let me give you a quick example. I go down to the Bay Area for college in the fall of 1988. I'm at a party, and nobody's at the dance floor, whatever song's playing. All of a sudden, that song goes off, and the next song comes on, and it's ding, the beginning of the Posse on Broadway. So now I'm bugging because I'm in California hearing this song. And then everybody else, when they hear the song, is like, ho, hands in the air, and the dance floor is packed. So I'm like, how can this be? This is a song about Seattle, and people outside Seattle love it. So then as I'm down there getting to know people, and hip-hop people who start finding out I'm from Seattle, they start asking me questions like, what's Broadway like? Or, you know, are the burgers at Dick's good?
Right.
And you know what I'm saying? I'm like, how do you even know? But that taught me the lesson about the ability of hip-hop to export aspects of local culture to places that they'd never seen before. Those people wouldn't have known those nuanced details about Seattle without that song. So that really helped crystallize how important it was. You maybe never been to Houston, Texas, but if you listen to the Ghetto Boys, they will give you information
all about Third Ward,
on what it's like in Houston, Texas. You know what I'm saying? So back to your original question, Mix-a-Lot's reference to him making a left at 23rd and Union, and the driver broke a left. But I am kind of most interested in this, in the more recent kind of intersection of local history and hip hop, particularly as it relates to 23rd and Union, and that is the discussion kind of brought up by Dre's with a couple of his songs where
Irony on 23rd,
where the hood ain't the same, and then he follows that up with Irony on 23rd, which is making the point around the fact that for decades, black and brown people have been arrested on this corner for selling the very same thing that now this white-owned dispensary is selling. And there is no lack of irony with regard to, you know what I mean, what that means for people who have lived here for a long time versus what we're seeing now, and how there seems to be a sliding scale and moving of the goalposts, if we want to call it that, with regard to opportunities around things that people who are in this community and from this community have been going to jail for many years.
That's real. Question for you. How big of a role has the DJ played over the years as far as, one, creating the sound, pushing the music, but also in culture creation?
So one thing, so I teach a hip hop class up at Seattle Central. And one thing that a lot of young people really have a little bit of trouble grasping is that in the early times of hip hop, the DJ was the central figure of it all. It was not the MC, it was the DJ. And so that changes a little bit as you get, as we get further into the 1980s, and I suppose record companies start feeling like, well, we can only pay the rapper. We don't have to pay the DJ. So the DJ starts taking a little bit of a backseat, but I think for people who have kind of been in and about the culture, the DJ never really lost that importance. The DJ was still very central to the experience. But so if you're talking about people from here, you're talking about early people like from Emerald Street Boys. Sugar Bear was an early, guy who was putting out mixtapes, putting together mixtapes, and obviously someone like Nasty Nest. But then as you get further kind of into the 1990s, you have someone like Vitamin D, who puts together what's known as the Pharmacy, which is like this basement studio, which throughout much of the 1990s was just pumping out hip hop album, artist, song after artist, that whole tribal collective, for which what Vitamin did was the entirety of all the engineering, playing instruments, sound design, all of that stuff. So you have someone like Vitamin, and then you have someone like a protege of Vitamin, Jake One. And Jake One comes along and, like I said, a Vitamin protege who goes on and has had a career where he has been nominated for, I think, a couple of production Grammys. He's worked with all of your favorite rappers, from your Rick Rosses to your De La Souls to your 50 Cents. He was actually even part of the 50 Cent G-Unit money management team, I think it was, the production team that they had kind of in the early 2000s. So just the extension of the DJ moving from simply spinning records to producing and creating music is something that's really part of the legacy. And there's one last point that I would like to make about this, is that for so many young people who grew up in these first and second generations of hip hop, you have just this, and I think it's so underrated, just this massive amount of unformally trained musical talent, if that's really even a word. And by that I'm saying that never really had formal musical training, but just learned by hands-on and figuring out as you go. And I'm not saying that there's no value in music lessons, but I'm also saying that there is value in kind of figuring out as you go. And so people like Vitamin and people like Jake and people like so many others who have that musical ear, people like Supreme, have that musical ear and are able to kind of apply that in a way that belies the fact that they may or may not have had any formal musical training.
Right. Yeah. I was waiting to see if you mentioned Supreme the Rock. Definitely an anchor, an icon. Mm-hmm. So along these lines, and now I want to talk about some of the other things you're doing. Who do you think is one of the biggest contributors to not only Seattle music, but music nationally across America, that the average person, if you leave the state of Washington or if you go to the East Coast or something like that, has probably never heard of, or maybe he's kind of heard of, but they've been putting in the work for years?
I think of somebody like, so if I kind of point at kind of a seminal moment, I kind of look back at that meeting between Ness and Mix-a-Lot that leads to Mix going on the radio and then leads to the formation of Nasty Mix Records and all that. If I think about somebody kind of in the next generation after, I think about someone like Jonathan Moore, Jonathan Wurster Moore. And he was on so many levels. In terms of his involvement, he was an artist. He was a label owner. He was a tour manager. He was, he wore so many hats and did so many different things within kind of the structure of the hip hop community that, if we think about something like the Teen Dance Ordinance, which really, really, really tried to put the smackdown on not just hip hop, but just local youth activities throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s. You have Jay Moore kind of doing counter programming at places like Langston Hughes, and then eventually at places like the Sit and
Spin, yeah.
And so you have the Sit and Spin where it got around the Teen Dance Ordinance because it would happen on afternoons, and it was the interesting place of kind of being in the laundromat. You know what I'm saying? That doubled as a venue. But so opening up a space like that for young people to kind of interact and experience and see live hip hop going down. And it is there, I want to say in 1999, that at one of these sit and spin events, that you have a young man named Ben Haggerty making his live stage appearance. And he eventually becomes, we all know as Macklemore. And so I'm just saying that the work that young people have done, people, not just young people, I guess, we're all about the same age. I think of us as young, but the work that people have done just over the years and the seemingly kind of small events that take place as a result of this work really get the ball rolling into what becomes someone like Macklemore, who, was a massive success and just had incredible amounts of appeal, above things that, we had really ever thought of. But all of it, whatever he does, you can't really tell whether it even happens without that initial experience at Sit and Spin. And so I think just the opportunity and the community-focused nature of that. I talk about Jay Moore, but there's also people like Y King, who opened up the local chapter of the Hip Hop Youth Action Summit. And people like my man King Chasm, founder of 206 Zulu. And there's so much kind of community-focused give back here in the local hip hop community. I mean, I would put what happens here within hip hop in terms of lifting up the youth up against any other city. In terms of the volume and the commitment that happens here, I'd put it up against any other city.
Wow, I'm glad the book doesn't come out until November, because we might just have to do a special with you in Community Voices or something, because I could really sit here and talk Seattle hip hop all day. What else are you doing? So we know, like I said, the book Emerald Streets is coming out in November, and man, if you're telling the story in the book like you're doing right now, it's definitely going to be a great read. What else keeps you busy? How are you staying connected actually with young people, especially the things that you're into and engage with? Is constant replenishment of the cultures. What else are you doing?
Well, so I taught kids in the 1990s at Zion Preparatory Academy, and then kind of a transition out of that was entering the University of Washington doctoral program in the College of Education. And there I wrote a dissertation about the disproportionate discipline that black students face in Seattle public schools. And so since that time, I've kind of been going to different schools, different districts, classrooms, working with teachers, working with administrators about what good teaching is and what it looks like, and relationship-based pedagogy and all this stuff that makes a difference in keeping kids in the classroom. Well, within the last couple of years, I've become involved in a partnership that is between Seattle Central College and Seattle Public Schools. It's called the Academy for Rising Educators. And the idea is to generate and cultivate homegrown teachers. 12th graders who are graduating from a Seattle public high school and are eligible for Seattle Promise. Instructional assistants who are working in schools right now and are looking for a path to certification. We're trying to lower as many barriers as we can: cost, scheduling, flexible scheduling of classes, child care. This was kind of before all this happened, but these are the things that we're thinking about how to try to lower the barriers. And so we just finished our first cohort. The first cohort started in the fall of 2019. We have cohort number 2 coming in this fall. We'll start online and virtually, but the idea of having groups come in together and kind of build bonds as they take classes together and go through the program is really an important supportive part, because they're working and going to school full time, which is a lot. For anybody that's done it, anybody that's done one knows that one is a lot. When you're trying to do both together, it's really a lot. And so the supportive kind of communal aspect of cohort is a reason why we have that there. And the other part is we are trying to be intentional about even details like selecting instructors who are going to participate in the program. One thing that kind of when I first started teaching in higher ed was how few teachers who teach in higher ed have actually had any real lessons or any classes on how to teach. If you have a master's degree or a PhD, the mastery of knowledge in a specific content area, and being able to communicate that effectively to students are two different things. And so we don't want to just bring anybody in who might just be a biology teacher. We want to bring someone in who is able to think about not only the way that they're going to teach, but also the population that they're working with, some of whom may be bringing some academic trauma to the table, especially if you're talking about students of color who grew up in Seattle proper. We're talking about, at least for black families, we're talking about the research I'm looking at goes back into the 70s. So we're talking about probably 2, 3 maybe generations of black families who have had this intergenerational trauma attached to their experiences in Seattle public schools. And that can manifest itself in a variety of ways as they try to maybe come back to the classroom for the first time after maybe a few years. And so we're trying to be very intentional about how we set it up so that we have instructors who are coming to teach the cohort that model the way that we want the cohort members to teach their children when they finally get their own classrooms.
Right, man, you're staying busy and you're writing books.
I can't believe I get paid for this.
Man, I'm gonna have to step my game up. I need to put a book out, man. Oh man, Dr. Daudi, you gotta make us a promise. Now, when this book is released in November, you gotta come back here.
Tell me when.
Okay, then we're going to hold it to you. And actually, Bobby Stills over there, he's giving me a thumbs up. We might want to do a special. We got a platform called Community Voices.
Okay.
I think it'd be real dope. We can expand more about this conversation.
Oh, there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
On both topics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Platform is yours. We're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, it's Wellness Wednesday right here on the Morning Update Show.